Now it's Erdogan's turn. The Russians have begun their retaliation against the Turkish leader, who is no longer a trusted ally for Putin. The relationship between the two leaders, once a key strategic partnership to balance power in the Middle East, has turned into a cold diplomatic revenge. The rupture began to take shape when Erdogan, in his eagerness to expand his neo-Ottoman influence, started challenging Russian interests in Syria with movements that destabilized the region and put Moscow in an uncomfortable position. Putin's response has arrived, and the decision to discard Ankara as the meeting place with the US delegation, which was ultimately held in Riyadh, is a clear sign of disdain toward the Turkish leader. The traitor will pay. For Russia, Erdogan is no longer on Putin's list of allies. Recent events in international diplomacy have sent a clear message. Erdogan has irreversibly betrayed Russia, and Moscow is beginning to take note of this transgression. In a world where loyalty and international alliances are key, Erdogan's decisions have started to fracture what was once a strategic relationship with the Kremlin. In this context, the rupture is evident, and its cost will be high. From Turkey's intervention in Syria to its recent rapprochement with the West, everything indicates that Russia will not forgive this betrayal. Revenge is already underway, and one of the first signs of this distancing is the recent choice of Saudi Arabia as the venue for an important diplomatic meeting between the United States and Russia instead of Ankara. This change of location has profound implications and highlights Erdogan's growing isolation. Tensions between Turkey and Russia are not a recent phenomenon. For years, both nations managed to maintain a complex yet pragmatic relationship, where differences were evident, but so were their common interests. However, the situation began to shift when Erdogan took an increasingly independent stance, seeking to expand his influence in the region and act according to his own interests, often without considering the consequences for Moscow. A critical point was Turkey's intervention in Syria, which put both countries in direct confrontation. Although Russia and Turkey had reached agreements regarding the Syrian situation, Erdogan's decision to conduct military operations in northern Syria disrupted Moscow's plans. In this sense, Turkey's actions were not only seen as an intrusion into Syria's sovereignty, but also as an attempt to consolidate Erdogan's power in the region, regardless of the stance of his main ally in the conflict, Russia. What many political observers fail to understand is that Erdogan's actions in Syria not only affected Russia, but also altered the balance in the Middle East. Moscow, which had been working tirelessly to ensure the stability of Bashar al-Assad's regime, saw Turkey's intervention as a threat to its efforts. In fact, Turkey's stance on Syria was not well received by Russia, especially since Moscow had militarily intervened in 2015 to save Assad's regime from collapse. Russia had paid a high price in terms of resources and human sacrifices to keep Assad in power. What followed was even more baffling for Russia. While Moscow became increasingly involved in Syria's internal politics, Turkey began to act as a more independent player in the region, not only distancing itself from Russia, but also increasing its collaboration with the West. This happened at a time when Russia saw itself more than ever as a power challenging US interests. The alliance between Erdogan and the West had remained tense over the years, but the Turkish president's recent moves signaled a clear shift in his alignment. In particular, his recent closeness to the United States and his statements in favor of certain Western interests began to be perceived as a direct challenge to Moscow's stance, which was unwilling to allow its influence in the region to be eroded by Ankara's maneuvers. The final blow in the relationship between Russia and Turkey was the fact that Erdogan was not included in the most recent meetings between Russia and the United States. Instead of Ankara, the high-level meeting between representatives of both countries took place in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, a location filled with symbolism. The choice of Saudi Arabia as the venue for the conventions was a clear message. Russia and the United States had decided to take a step back and distance themselves from Turkey. The decision not to choose Ankara as the place where key issues, especially those related to the war in Ukraine and regional stability, would be discussed, reflects growing distrust toward Erdogan and his recent stances. In fact, Yuri Podolyaka, a well-known military blogger and political analyst, pointed out that this change of venue was a punch in the stomach for Erdogan, a diplomatic way of reminding him that his actions have consequences and that his role as a mediator in international conflicts no longer holds the weight it once did. This diplomatic blow was compounded by another crucial factor: the humiliating meeting between Erdogan and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. While Turkey had attempted to maintain a neutral stance regarding the war in Ukraine, Erdogan's recent statements on the matter were not enough to improve his image in Moscow. After his meeting with Zelensky, Erdogan made it clear that he was willing to be a mediator between Russia and Ukraine, and that the Turkish government could serve as a suitable venue for future peace negotiations. However, Erdogan's proposals were ignored. The meeting in Riyadh made it clear that neither Russia nor the United States trusted him as a facilitator of dialogue between the conflicting parties. Podolyaka noted that, in the end, Zelensky found himself in a completely humiliated position, reflecting Erdogan's growing delegitimization on the international stage. Meanwhile, Russia's attitude toward Turkey has become increasingly cold and calculated. Moscow no longer considers Erdogan a close ally. The cordial collaboration policy that both countries had maintained in the past is coming to an end. A relationship that had been useful for both nations at various times, especially during the 2015 migration crisis and the fight against terrorism, is now facing a breaking point. Instead of strengthening ties, Russia is beginning to exert pressure on Erdogan both diplomatically and militarily. The Kremlin is perceived to be taking its revenge in a strategic manner. This is evident not only in the choice of venues for international meetings, but also in more subtle signs, such as economic sanctions and adjustments to trade relations between both countries. In this complex power game, Erdogan has played his cards poorly. The Turkish president, once considered a key Russian ally in the Middle East, now finds himself in a difficult position. Not only is he being ignored by Moscow, but his ability to influence regional conflicts has been severely weakened. Erdogan's strategic miscalculations and growing proximity to the West have led to an unprecedented diplomatic setback with Russia. The signs are clear. Moscow is severing ties and Turkey is losing its influence in the region. The consequences of this shift could redefine geopolitical dynamics in the Middle East and beyond. What do you think about Russia's retaliation against Erdogan? Do you believe Turkey can recover its influence in the region? Leave your thoughts in the comments, subscribe for more in-depth geopolitical analysis, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video.